President Volodymyr Zelensky is facing growing pressure to agree to a 28-point US peace plan to end the war in Ukraine, even though it was drafted without his involvement. The Kremlin said today that while it was yet to discuss the plan in detail with the United States, it was completely open to the negotiations. President Donald Trump has said he thought Thursday was an appropriate deadline for Ukraine to accept the proposals.
It reads like Vladimir Putin's wish list, a 28-point peace proposal that echoes the Kremlin's long-held demands. While a draft of the plan confirms Ukraine's sovereignty and promises reliable security guarantees, its military would be capped at just 600,000 personnel, and NATO membership would be off the table. And crucially, Russia would gain all of the Donbass, with both Luhansk and Donetsk recognised as Russian territory. In a 10-minute address to the nation, Volodymyr Zelensky laid bare the pressure Ukraine faces, calling it one of the most difficult moments in his country's history.
Ukraine faces extraordinary pressure. We are potentially facing a difficult choice: surrender our dignity or risk losing a key partner. Either we accept these difficult 28 points or we face an extremely difficult winter. I'll argue our position, I'll push back, I'll propose alternatives, but we won't give the enemy a reason to claim Ukraine doesn't want peace.
But Ukraine's hand is weak. Its forces face growing pressure on the battlefield, and Mr. Zelensky is contending with a damaging corruption scandal. Europe has rallied behind Kyiv, but after being excluded from the negotiations yet again, its leverage is limited.
Well, I've just had a call with President Zelensky alongside President Macron and Chancellor Merz, and that was an opportunity for us to express again our support for Ukraine and the principle that's very important, which is all matters to do with Ukraine must be determined ultimately by Ukraine.
A principle now being tested like never before. Edmund Heafy, RTE News.
Well, let's get more on this now from our Europe editor, Tony Connolly. Tony, what's the view from Brussels as more details of this US peace plan emerge and of the timeline that's now been attached?
Well, Sharon, clearly the EU believes that in its current form, this plan, as reported, would mean the abject capitulation of Ukraine and the end of the country as a sovereign nation. Now, a lot of the key players, EU leaders like Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, Emmanuel Macron, the French President, Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, and Sir Keir Starmer as well, who we heard there, are all in Johannesburg at the G20 summit. So that means that we won't have a repeat of what happened after the Alaska summit between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, where a whole delegation of EU leaders and the NATO Secretary General hightailed it to Washington to rally their support behind Volodymyr Zelensky. Having said that, there have been hurried phone calls between the leaders and President Zelensky. Now, there is some sense in Europe that this plan is not a definitive one, that it may not have commanded the entire support of the Trump administration, and that there are elements of it that could be part of a process going forward. The German foreign minister saying this was simply a list of things that Russia and Ukraine would have to talk about at some point. But there is quite a lot of dismay that despite all of Europe's efforts to toe the line with Donald Trump, to do what he's asked them to do, such as increase defence spending, turn off the flow of Russian fossil fuels into Europe, and commit to Ukraine's security itself with boots on the ground if necessary in the future. Despite doing all that, Europe has once again been excluded from the process. Although having said that, as one diplomat said, Europe is in a better position to take up the reins of Ukraine's support as a result of all the preparations it's been doing.
Europe editor Tony Connolly, thank you. Returning to Ukraine now and the demands of that 28-point US peace plan. Just before coming on air, I spoke to Siobhan O'Grady from the Ukraine Bureau of the Washington Post. I began by asking her what alternative proposals President Zelensky is likely to make.
I definitely think there are several parts of that plan that have long been red lines for Ukraine. So it doesn't come as a surprise that Zelensky is completely reluctant to sign on to it. I think what he was astonished by was the fact that the United States has been pressuring him to sign it by Thanksgiving or to risk losing all U.S. support to the country, which we at the Washington Post reported earlier this day. This is just shocking because if the United States were to cut support, that could include intelligence sharing, which is necessary on the front line and could actually put Ukrainian soldiers at grave risk. So he's currently weighing either a deal that completely betrays the independence of the country as it's currently written, or betrays the safety of troops who are currently on the front line if he doesn't accept it. So he's been put in a very difficult position.
Yeah, as you say, he made a very sombre address today to the nation, and he made it during the day, which I understand is quite unusual for him to do. And he said that Ukraine has a difficult choice between losing dignity or losing a key partner. It's an indication of the tightrope he's walking here, isn't it?
It is. And I think the idea that he has several days now, Thanksgiving is on November 27th. And so he has until then to try to come up with some sort of alternative and to have his European partners, who he has relied on so much, and especially during the Trump presidency, has really turned to European partners as his closest allies to try to navigate this difficult relationship that he's had with President Trump. He really has to be careful not to further irritate the White House. He knows that the White House is necessary to the peace process, but he also needs to make sure that he's not on a timeline that the White House has concocted for their own benefit, and that he is still doing what's best for his country. And so I think he's hoping to rally support in the coming days. I know that the Europeans are working with that same 28-point plan to come up with some alternative proposals within that same framework. And so not a completely separate plan, but actually still based on that plan, which was drafted by the Russian envoy Dmitriev and the U.S. envoy Witkoff together before it was presented to the Ukrainians. So they're really trying to make some adjustments that they can go back to the White House with and hope that Trump will sign on. We're hearing that Trump himself will be the one who decides if changes are made. So this deadline is fast approaching, but there's still time. And I think part of the public pleas today and the fact that we journalists started hearing about this from our sources was an indication that they were hoping to get the story out there, that they're under immense pressure and are looking for more help in the days ahead of that deadline next Thursday.
And back at home in Ukraine, of course, there are other issues at play. There's an energy scandal for one at a time of power cuts. You're experiencing one there at the moment. Does President Zelensky have the support he needs at home?
I think that that's one of the big questions right now that we're waiting to see. People are deeply frustrated and just hurt and horrified by the fact that some of the people in the president's inner circle have been accused of profiting off of the energy and defense sectors at the same time that so many Ukrainians are being killed on the front line. Ukrainians were being sent to defend the country in the name of democracy and in the name of Western values. And at the same time, some of the country's most powerful people have been accused of lining their pockets with the country's money that could have been used to help protect energy infrastructure or to arm some of those soldiers. And so there's definitely a deep sense of hurt here. Zelensky himself has not yet been personally implicated in the scandal and may not be. His name has not been mentioned as having personal involvement. But the fact that people in his inner circle have been implicated has definitely reduced public trust in him. And I think that there's a huge call on him right now, even from members of his own political party, to take very decisive action to fire one of his closest aides, who has not officially been named a suspect, but many believe is involved in the same scheme, and to just do a total overhaul of the government. And of course, they're asking him to do all of this at the same time that he's under this immense pressure from the United States. Of course, these two things are unrelated, but they do touch each other. And I think that there are fears that he will face more pressure at the negotiation table because he's in a vulnerable position at home. But at the same time, he knows that now more than ever, the public will not accept a bad deal, and that he doesn't want his reputation and his legacy to be that he sold out his country to the Russians.
Siobhan O'Grady at the Ukraine Bureau of the Washington Post. Thank you so much for speaking to us on 6-1 this evening.
Thanks so much for having me.